In mid-February 2026, just days before the outbreak of the conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran, a significant gathering took place in Jerusalem. The annual conference of presidents of major American Jewish organizations met at the Mamilla Hotel. While Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave a standard 20-minute speech focused largely on the immediate threat from Iran, it wasn't his words that stole the headlines. Instead, the international community was captivated by a provocative claim made by his political rival, former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett.
A new Turkish threat is emerging. And from here, I warn, Turkey is the new Iran. Erdogan is sophisticated, dangerous, and he seeks to encircle Israel. We can't close our eyes again.
Bennett's message was blunt. His argument suggests that once the confrontation with Iran concludes, Israel must shift its strategic focus toward Turkey, viewing it as the next major regional challenge. This wasn't an isolated comment. For months, influential thinkers close to Israeli policy circles have been echoing this sentiment. Michael Rubin, a researcher at the American Enterprise Institute, sparked outrage in Ankara by publicly questioning if Turkey in 2036 would look like Iran in 2026. Shortly after, journalist Bradley Martin published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal titled "The Urgent Need to Contain Turkey," arguing that Ankara's independent foreign policy is increasingly at odds with Western interests. The feeling of unease is mutual. Turkish officials, including President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, have begun describing Israel as a direct security threat. Turkey's response has been a massive push toward military self-reliance. In August 2024, President Erdogan famously stated that if Israel has its Iron Dome missile defense system, Turkey will build a Steel Dome. While Turkey and Israel are not currently enemies in the traditional sense, their interests are increasingly clashing across the Middle East. At the heart of this tension is Turkey's rapidly growing defense industry. To understand why this sector has become a flashpoint, we have to look back at a moment that changed Turkish history forever, the Johnson Letter. On June 5, 1964, U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson sent a letter to Turkish Prime Minister that shattered the trust between the two allies. To the Turkish public, it was seen as a national betrayal. To understand the weight of this letter, we need a bit of context. After World War II, Turkey was a vital Western ally, primarily because it controls the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits. These narrow waterways are the only way in or out of the Black Sea. During the Cold War, the U.S. desperately wanted to keep Turkey in the Western camp to monitor Soviet naval movements. Between 1947 and 1973, the U.S. poured billions of dollars into Turkey in military and economic aid. Turkey became so dependent that almost its entire military ran on American equipment. However, a crisis in Cyprus changed everything. Cyprus is an island in a prime strategic location in the Mediterranean. In the early 1960s, violence broke out between the island's Greek and Turkish populations. As Turkey prepared to intervene to protect the Turkish Cypriots, President Johnson sent his infamous letter. He warned Turkey that if they used American weapons to intervene in Cyprus, and the Soviet Union attacked Turkey in response, NATO might not come to Turkey's defense. Furthermore, he explicitly forbade the use of U.S.-supplied equipment for anything other than defensive purposes approved by Washington. The message was clear. Turkey's military power was only theirs as long as it served American interests. The consequences of this dependency became painfully real in 1974. Following a Greek-led coup in Cyprus, Turkey finally intervened militarily. In response, the U.S. Congress imposed a total arms embargo on Turkey. Because the Turkish military relied so heavily on American spare parts, the embargo was devastating. Within a year, half of Turkey's combat aircraft were grounded because they couldn't be repaired. Turkish leaders found themselves in the humiliating position of begging U.S. officials for spare parts just to keep their jets in the air. This was the ultimate never-again moment for Ankara. The Turkish government realized that true sovereignty required a domestic defense industry. They began founding state-owned companies that are now household names in the defense world. Aselsan, the brain behind electronics and communications. Roketsan, the powerhouse for missiles and rockets. TUSASH, the pioneer of aerospace and aviation. Fast forward to the 2000s and the rise of the Justice and Development Party (AKP). Under President Erdogan, the strategy shifted from just assembling foreign designs to inventing original Turkish technology. The government began pouring money into research and development, connecting private companies with universities. The results have been transformative. By 2024, Turkey achieved an 80% self-sufficiency rate in its defense needs. Perhaps the most famous success story is Baykar, the company behind the TB2 drones that have seen significant action in conflicts from Nagorno-Karabakh to Ukraine. In 2025 alone, Turkey's defense exports reached nearly $10 billion. Despite this progress, Turkey still faces hurdles. They were recently removed from the US F-35 fighter jet program after purchasing a Russian missile system, and they still struggle with producing advanced jet engines. However, they are currently developing their own fifth-generation stealth fighter, known as the Khan. The recent conflict between Israel and Iran has provided Turkey with a wealth of data. The Turkish National Intelligence Academy recently published a study titled The 12-Day War Lessons for Turkey. The study highlighted several key takeaways. 1. The power of alliances. Israel's success was bolstered by high-level intelligence and logistical support from Western allies, while Iran found itself largely alone. 2. The importance of elite protection. Israel's ability to target high-ranking Iranian commanders in the early hours of the war showed Turkey that it must better protect its own military and scientific leaders. 3. Civil defense. Israel's low civilian casualty rate, thanks to early warning systems and widespread bunkers, convinced Turkish planners to invest more in public safety infrastructure and steel dome technologies. Turkey is no longer the diplomatically quiet, military-dependent nation it was in the 1960s. It is an emerging industrial power with a military that increasingly thinks and builds for itself. For Israel, a Turkey that can manufacture its own high-tech weapons and set its own foreign policy agenda is a much more complex challenge than the Turkey of the past. For Ankara, the lessons of history, from the Johnson Letter to the 1974 embargo, serve as a constant reminder that in a volatile region, you are only as secure as the equipment you can build yourself. This brings us to our question for you. If the regional map is shifting, do you think Turkey is truly the new Iran in the eyes of Israeli strategists, or is this just political rhetoric? If you were in charge of Israeli or Turkish security, what would your next move be? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay updated. See you in the next video.